Amy, and welcome back to Wired for Change. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most under-discussed and most challenging parts of growing a company, and that's how to scale wisely. Whether it's about knowing what size your organization should be, how much structure there should be, how to make the tough decisions about your project or product, and how to change your people or culture from stage to stage and how to manage that. These are all tricky things that you really need to learn from experience. We're very lucky to be here today with Rich Napoli, who is very experienced at many different stages of growth. He's taken products big, he's taken companies big. We'll learn a little bit more about his background. Rich and I have a bit of a history as being co-hosts of an internet radio show together. And we have also we kicked off the Wired for Change podcast with having Rich here to interview me. And so now I've brought him back to interview him properly so we can hear from the real master at leading organizations and leading product development. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be back online on the air with you again. It's been, as you said, we did that whole blockchain show for a while, and now we did the first Wired for Change, and I'm honored to be your first repeat guest here and help this. You've already done amazing things with the show. It's really taken off. A lot of good feedback people are giving you, and you've covered a lot of different topics. So it's been an enjoyable thing to watch, and I'm sure your listeners would agree.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rich. I really appreciate your support and your mentorship. I know you mentor many, many people. And so excited to have you back always and to have your wisdom with us to help us scale. And just as a side note, if you haven't already subscribed to Wired for Change, I would encourage you to do that if you're interested in change or transformation. And we would love to have you to help continue the discussion, folks. So please do subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks. So let's get started, Rich, and let's hear a little bit about your background just for our viewers. I've enjoyed many stories about your background, but tell us a little bit more about where you've been and what you've experienced.
All right, sure, Amy, thanks. Well, I'm retired now, but I mean, I had a long career in the software industry, dating all the way back to 1978 when I first got out of college. So been doing this a long time, and certainly, been at some small software product companies, been at some small ones that we sold to big companies, been part of big companies that we built the software division around. So I've worked for small companies, worked with big companies, Citibank, State Street, two global banks, as well as a bunch of smaller companies, and then some mid-sized companies in between that are in that 1,000 to 3,000 personnel range. So I've sort of, not by design or anything, but sort of had the experience of being at various size organizations in their lifespan, from being a one-person, two-person company to being all the way up to being a global banking organization. So it's given me a sort of a viewpoint that I want to just we can use that as sort of a fulcrum to talk about organizational scale and growth, because I've sort of seen the organization at various levels of growth. And I want to use an analogy. Me, I'm always big with analogies here. But I want to use an analogy about that, an organization is like an organism. In fact, they both come from the same root word, means from organize, meaning, to structure and organize your behavior to get more things done, right? So I'm going to use the analogy of an organism, and of course, having 10 grandkids, I'm going to focus on human development, right? So if you remember back in your biology class, you have you start with a fertilized egg, you call it a zygote, and in the beginning, it just replicates. It's a one-cell organism, and then it's a two-cell organism, and a four-cell organism, and an eighth, and 16th. For those first 16, 4 or 5 divisions, every cell is identical. It's just replicating itself. And then as early as I think day 5, it starts to sort of begin to specialize a little bit, that the next doubling of cells, they're not identical anymore. They start to, I think it's called a blastocyst or something. It starts to form a little thing inside of itself. By day 14 or 15, they've already organized into 3 separate groups of cells. I don't know, my biology, endoderm, mesoderm, and something else, I don't know. But three sort of sets of cells. By day 23 after fertilization, there's a beating heart inside those cells. Now, when you think about it in terms of growth, if that when that baby gets born and then grows up and say it becomes an elite marathon runner, the heart of a marathon runner is enormous. It's very specialized. It delivers vast amounts of oxygen and blood to its body. It's a perfected heart, right? That is, it beats at like 35 beats a minute, but it can do everything. The heart of that little tiny 23-day old zygote is a very primitive little heart. It's very little in comparison with a marathon runner's elite heart, and yet that little heart does eventually develop into that. And so, if you tried to take that marathon runner's heart and stick it into that little cell, of course it wouldn't work. It'd be way too big for what that little embryo needs right away. But by knowing where that heart is going to eventually be, it's building towards that over time. And I want to use that analogy for an organization too, because what I've seen is that, and listen, I did not do this right. I've been a CEO of a couple of companies, but I certainly didn't do this right. But hindsight's 20. So it's knowing and learning what's the appropriate size, in this case, heart, for the organization that you're in. If you're a two-person company, you you really just need copies of yourself, and everybody's doing everything like the little 4-cell, 8-cell creature. When you start to specialize, it's still very primitive in the beginning, but you'd like to know where you're going to get to so that you can put some of the foundational principles in place. And it's an art form. I mean, there's not a science to this, as far as I know, that says this is exactly what you should be doing in 2 years of development of a company. This is where you should be. It's very fluid. It's very dynamic. It's very messy in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
But there is some general, principles of scale there that you have to you have to apply. And I think it's and I've seen it. I've done it both ways. I've done it where I've grown the company too fast and I didn't scale the heart and the rest of the organs underneath it, so that I didn't have a fully functioning organization that could continue to grow. And you had to put the brakes on and retool a bit. And I've gone the other way where I've built, I took something, knowing where we're going to go. It's like, all right, I'm going to be a marathon runner. Let's stick that big heart in this little tiny organism. No, that doesn't work either. And I've made both mistakes. So we're going to use that just to talk about how we scale a company appropriately. So is that a good analogy?
Yeah, I thought that was great. I always am a huge fan of your analogies, Rich. So I love that. The idea of growing and having the right size, organs for where you're at. And I guess I was thinking that if only it was nature taking over, making some of those tough calls, like it does with a baby, right? For us, growing a company, unfortunately,
Yeah,
nature, you can't just let nature take its course, because
it's
human
true.
beings being what they are, it could be a mess, right?
It
So
is a mess every time. It is but it is a fluid thing to do for sure.
and
Uh,
I love that you've made kind of different decisions and seen kind of different outcomes, as well, because I think when you just take one path once, you're biased by just that one experience that you've got.
sure.
But, now that you've made those decisions a few different times and seen different outcomes, and even though they were different situations, it really gives you kind of a good appreciation for cause and effect, and how like a system works when you've got people, process, and technology. So maybe we could dive into that a little bit more in
Yeah.
terms of organizational structure, and what size like is right for the size of company. What are some of those principles or patterns that you've seen, Rich, knowing that you can't always do things by design, and sometimes the tough calls kind of sneak up on you?
Yeah, and again, it is it is organic in the sense
Hmm.
of it's not a precise science here. It's a gradual evolution of things. Um, the biggest thing I would say is, if even when you just start your company in one person, to have a general sense, you might want to do a little sort of review of what organizations look like when they're bigger, right? And not that you're going to build those big things, but I mean that the sort of the imprint or the design of a fully grown human is inside those little cells from the time that it's first conceived. So it knows where it's going, right? And it's going to get there eventually. Oftentimes in business, I don't think, and especially entrepreneurs that are starting their own companies, it's difficult to really to focus on any of those things because you're just trying to, you got to create revenue, you got to build a product or a service that people want to pay money for. There's a lot of things that you have to do primarily. That's, maybe that's the fertilization part. I don't know, but there's a lot of early work of course you have to do, but keeping in mind of trying to understand is like, okay, at some point I'm going to need an HR department, or HR people. I'm going to need legal people. I'm going to need finance people. I'm going to need sales people. I'm going to need operations people. I'm going to need, facilities people even eventually. I'm going to need all these things. And then as I replicate, if I go beyond a single country or a single region, I have to replicate some of those things around. So, which ones do you need first? I think that's one of the things that I tend to, I mean, some of it's, if you're an entrepreneur, the other thing you've heard me say many times is that, if you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, your job is not to do everything right. Your job is to find out what you do right well and focus on that and find people to do the things that you're not good at to do the rest of it. So for me, as I'm starting, even though I have an MBA in finance, I'm not a finance guy. I just operate much more intuitively. And yet I know the need for, hardcore numbers and somebody's got to keep the books, right? So for me, the first kind of, sort of specialization I'd have is somebody that can handle finance. Just because I'm going to focus on growing and scaling the company, I can't be tied down. I will spend days doing a spreadsheet where a good finance person can do it in minutes, right? So it's just not a good use of my time. So I'm going to specialize that off elsewhere. But other people may be great at finance, and that's a natural thing for them. And they might say, I'm really bad at people analysis and people, so I'm going to focus on HR first. That's my first subdivision of specialization of the embryo. And I will say, when we come back later on to scaling the organization and so on, is one of the most key hires I think is an organization can make is your HR person. And why? Because the HR person is the person that you want to pick your HR person to be almost a spiritual clone of yourself in terms of not so much your talents, but your image of what do you want this company to be, right? And what kind of culture you want to have and so on. Because that person is going to be interviewing and weeding and sifting through all the other resumes on your behalf. Not that you'll give that up to them. You'll still be involved in the early days, but the culture you want the organization to have the HR person is a big part of helping to shape that. And the same thing if you're trying to change your culture. If you've got one kind of culture and you want to be a different culture, the first thing you do is you fix the HR. You find the right HR person. You pull out the person that may have created what you have, and you pull them out because that's not what you want. And you got to get the person that has in mind your image of what the company will be.
Well, that's really interesting. So you're going to be looking for somebody who really understands like your vision and where you're trying to go and what building that kind of an organization looks like. And hopefully they've done it before kind of thing. Somebody who can really adapt and change to that.
Yeah, and my, the company of relevance, we have a unique company culture that's, very integrity oriented and hard work oriented and ethical oriented, and so that's something we want to make sure we hire other people like that we've imprinted that on the organization. The first 5 hires you make will then drive that culture of your organization for the next 5 years, right? So you want to make sure you're aligned, that cultural orientation together. So anyway, go ahead.
I was going to ask, so, because those first 5 people are so important, you also have to know maybe when somebody isn't the right fit, after you've had them for a while as well, right?
Well, yeah,
Which must be a tough call when you're that size too.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it at a slightly bigger size where I had several people at one company that were attracted to the company when it was a tiny little organism, and they got to do everything, right? And they were that you know 16 equal cells, and they all run around, and they all scurry, they all got things done, and that there's sort of a joyfulness in that, it can be, and as you scale the organization and you need to start to specialize, some of those people don't scale with the organization, right? They get stuck, and it's like, well, I'm used to doing everything, a little bit of everything, and so you know, sometimes those people grow and develop and decide, well, I'm really good at this piece of the organization, and I'm going to give up some of these other roles to focus on this. Other people can't make that, and so I've had some hard conversations with people and said, look, you know, we're not a company of 10 people anymore. We're a company of 200 people. We're a company of 500 people. The role you had as a 10-person company doesn't exist anymore. You know, that we don't need that kind of talent anymore. We need, you know, some real specialization. We need heart cells, liver cells, lung cells. We need specialized talent, and we need a couple of generalists that can, you know, keep it all together. But we don't need an army of generalists. And so they've had some conversation. One time I took a group that didn't grow, like, you know, were resistant to that. Said, all right, you know what? I'm going to create a special little organism of just you people, and you're going to be what we call this back in the product days. You're going to do what we call funded development. You're going to do. You're not going to be part of the overall architecture and growth of the whole product, but you're going to be the people that our customers will pay for to do something unique to them. You know, that is not part of the standard product. We're going to bolt it on the side, and you're free to do it however you want. It's never going to be part of the standard product. It's going to be bolted on, and you're going to make commission on it. And it's made it up like a little business unit. And they loved it. It was fun. And, you know, so sometimes you can take those people and find another role for them, but other times you have to say, we're not that company anymore, and maybe it's, you know, time you look elsewhere. So it's
Wow.
not everybody makes the growth transition, and that's okay. Then they just should go find another one that's in that early stage growth. And it's even true of me. I've realized I've been part of some very big organizations. I don't like very big organizations. To me, that's, for my brain, it's too specialized. You know, my stage of growth is maybe taking a company from 1 million to, you know, 50 million. That's sort of where I live. And when it gets much beyond that, it's like the amount of specialization you have to have. I don't know. There are people that are much better at that than I am. You know, that's the next stage of growth.
Mhm.
It's going from maybe a newborn baby to a toddler, versus a 10-year-old versus a 20-year-old. Each level of stage of growth of the organization may require a different CEO to kind of get you to the next person.
I
Uh,
think that's such an important insight, you know, Rich, both from the perspective of the company and also from the perspective of the individual. I think there are people who feel like, you know, if they're not wanted at the company anymore, it's because they failed or they're not a good worker. But sometimes it's just about, you know, recognizing that there's an ebb and flow, and there's a path where at a different stage it might not be the right company for you. So I think you telling that story about yourself and recognizing, well, this is the best place for me. It's that, you know, between 0 and 50 million. That's what you love and that's what you're great at. Frees people to think about things that way themselves and not think that, well, if I haven't stayed at the same company the whole time, or if it doesn't make sense for me right now, it's my personal feeling, for instance. So that's
right,
great.
right, right. It's not personal feelings. It's like what you're good at. I mean, one of my companies, we sold it to State Street, big global institutional banking company, offices around the world. And I was reporting, so I ran product development for this company. We're now part of State Street, and I became part of the CIO's executive staff. And they did. They're very big on. I have to say, I really admired them. They're very focused on succession planning and personal growth and so on to see how you do. So they did profiles of all the direct reports to the CIO,
Mhm.
and all of the other ones had been hired by State Street, right? And they decided to work for State Street because it was a big company and they liked the structure and they fit in. I was not. I was acquired into that, right? I was grafted on there.
Mhm.
And when you looked at our profiles, it's so funny. They have this chart. I can't even remember the chart, but it would be like how well you scored on different attributes, you know,
Mhm.
loyalty, innovation, management, this and that. and they would wait, they'd have graphs of them. And every other person that reported to the CEO would have a graph curve that looked like this. It's like I'm high on loyalty, low on innovation, let's say. I'm just making this up, and high on budget control, and low on personnel management, something like that. And mine was the exact inverse of that. So where they were high, I was low. Where they were low, I was high. And it's just like, guys, I don't fit in this organization, And
Oh.
I went to the guy that I worked for. Did you? I can't remember. Anyway, you might have met the guy. I went to work. I went to the guy I worked for at the time, because I would report to the CIO and I also report to a business unit, and I was the head of the technology for that business unit. And I'm like, I'm leaving. You gotta package me out of here, because I just don't fit here. And he was like, no. And I was an SVP at the time, senior vice president. And he said, nobody has ever walked away from this at that level. I'm like, yeah, but none of the people that are at that level ever got, all the other people at that level were hired by, State Street to work at that level. I was not. I was grafted on. And so I went back. I left, went back and became a CEO of a small, software engineering company, and then a CEO of Relevance. So it's just, knowing where you fit, So I can't be a part. It was fun to grow it. I mean, for a while I was like part of an incubated group at State Street, and we got free reign. So it was like being in a small startup, but with the purse of a big company. And then after we scaled it, we got up. Then the State Street said, "Okay, fun's over. Now we're going to take your group and carve it up, and put the infrastructure people here, and the software development people here, and the operations people here, and they just kind of just dismantled the group," which made sense.
Yeah.
But it was like, that's not, game's over for me. So,
Well, that still takes some personal courage, though, I think, too, to make that kind of a call, and that must have been kind of a tricky one personally.
yeah, but it was, I just know myself that says I won't be. I have to enjoy what I'm doing. I have to want to come to work every day, and just being, managing, taking taking an organization from sort of the 0 point to the 80% point is where I can do great at. Going from 80 to 100, it's too much. I'm not that detail oriented in order to just, micromanage from 80 to 81 to 82, 83, 84. I get you from 0 to 80, and then somebody else can get you the rest of the way. But that's part of what, you're saying. You're right. It does mean you have to be self-aware. You have to be self-reflective and say, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. And I'm going to pull the ripcord here because this is not where I want to be. So it's a personal growth for yourself, and same thing for the organization. Is you have to know, what scale the organization is at, not only yourself, but where the organization is, to know, have you built the scaffolding along the way? So as you're growing, you got the scaffolding of an organization behind you. Because I think you want to talk about how an organization can sort of overreach, if it's growing too fast, and it happens all the time. I mean, when you see.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
maybe you can characterize that for us a little bit. I mean, you've given us a little bit of a sense of the difference between kind of the large kind of organization where you're kind of being merged in, and you've got to sort of toe the line kind of thing, versus that small organization where everybody's got to have to be like a generalist. But there are a few kind of pivots in between, and there are some times when you've overheated, and maybe you're trying to grow too fast and you haven't got enough of that scaffolding. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of what that feels like, or
Yeah, well,
how to recognize that call, I guess.
yeah. Well, in the software product industry, which is where most of my career was, if you're not, doubling your sales every year in the early days, you're doing something wrong, right? So it was fun to be part of a software product company, because 1 year of growth of a software company was like 5 to 7 years anywhere else, right? In terms of not just revenue wise, but what the organization, size had to be in order to support that revenue. So I got to see that, that kind of growth. It's like watching a fertilized egg. Maybe instead of taking 9 months to grow, it's like 6 days. It goes from fertilized egg to a full baby. It's that kind of accelerated. The same principles apply about knowing when to divide. What was one person's job, I'm not going to split that into two, or now I'm going to split it into four. I'm now going to make a department for that because the demands of it are such. I think that, it's easy to go too far. it's easy, especially when you're growing. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to set up a finance department, an HR department, and an accounting department, and a sales department, and an operations department, and a facilities department. You can't do that when you're 10 people, right? You just, you would smother yourself with process and control and organizational weight that just, too heavy for the size organism you are at that point, organization you are. And so I tend to go the other way. I always tend to have the scaffolding, the organization leaning over the scaffolding a little bit too far, and then slowly.
That's very visual. I love it. That's great.
Because it's always easier to, at least I found, to put enough scaffolding to add the scaffolding in. The danger is if you have too much scaffolding, your costs are way up here and your revenues aren't up high enough, and you don't, you have too much organization for the revenues you're generating. So it's an art form, when to grow and then when to divide, like a cell, when to do mitosis, whatever it's called, and divide into another cell.
I've completely forgotten biology, so you can tell me anything you want. Call it what you like.
But there's just a gut sense of when it's time. You always stretch it a little bit. It's like, no, I don't want to start this yet because it's going to cost money. And anytime you decide to divide, you are now multiplying your costs, right? You're increasing your costs. So when you're starting a company very young, you do that very carefully. You wait until the almost a breaking point. You say, okay, we got to bring somebody on, but always mindful again of where the organization is going to grow. It's like, yeah, right now I have one person. In one company I hired I guess I call him a CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, and he basically did everything other than sales and software, right? But he did finance, he did HR, and he did legal, and did facilities, all rolled into one guy. And he's a very senior guy, a good friend of mine, someone that I had a lot of respect for his talents, and he was great. He was great at holding that and putting in the infrastructure just enough to get his work done, but knowing where, he had been with me at bigger companies and knowing how it's going to have to scale. So, go ahead.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, leading and having teams who are in that phase, because as a team member, if you're building, over the edge of the scaffolding, as you say, people will feel like they're doing a lot, like a lot of the time, right? They'll feel kind of stretched, and you got to hire the right people, I think, who are excited by that and who like, having lots more to do than they actually have time for in that nature of things. And then you have to know, leadership wise, how to lead a team like that and how to inspire them to continue sort of running like that. Right. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I often talk to people about as I'm bringing them on in that small company is letting them know that we're going to be a bigger company. We're not going to just be growing 1 to 2% a year. We're going to be cell dividing and growing rapidly in orders of magnitude kind of growth. And there's a rush of excitement to that. But I also tell them, like, look, the job if you stay with this organization, the job you're going to have 5 years from now doesn't exist today, because we're not big enough to have a whole department for this or a whole department for that. But if, as the organization grows, you can either grow on the outside of the balloon, if you will, and just, rise at the top, or decide where you want to specialize and pick your niche and build that department that doesn't exist today. And so get them excited by, the things that would excite me. Is like, I loved building an organization that I didn't have to repair someone else's organizational structure, that I can kind of just build it the way I want. And I offer that to the staff. Say, look, you've been in other organizations. You've seen it done wrong. Help me do it right. Help me scale it and be that person that's going to decide how that part of the organization. If you're going to be a lung, be the best lung you can be. You're going to be a heart, be the best heart you can be. And it's done wrong. So I think that's sort of how I inspire people. And of course, it depends upon what kind of company you are. If you're profit or nonprofit. I mean, a lot of times we would offer, for the early people, offer equity stakes, and it's sort of relatively free to give out as a founder or as a CEO. It doesn't cost anything immediately, right? Or give them options even if you don't want to give stock. But there's lots of different ways you can let a person share in the growth of the company, because you want them to be part of that. I always remember one company I was at. It was the first time I was really, at the top level of well, not the, maybe it's the second time. The first big company I've been at the top of the food chain there, and but it wasn't my company. I was brought on to help grow it and sell it, and we did sell it, and some of the staff was like, they saw how much money the founders made, 30, $40 million a pop, each one of them. And the rank and file were like, well, what's in it for us? Why are we killing ourselves for these guys? And I didn't have a good answer.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, right, because we didn't share, and it wasn't my call to make, but we didn't share in the success of our growth with the rank and file, and that can generate resentment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to make sure, let them stand beside you and see the vision of where you're going, and then offer the career incentives, the growth incentives, as well as the financial incentives to stick around to see that through.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So we are getting close to the end of time, but I do want to ask you one more question. And I do have lots more questions for you with respect to product decisions and how to scale
Yes,
product as well. So maybe we'll catch that in a future episode.
sure.
But last question for today, what is one thing that you would have told yourself, your former self, way back when, if you could go back now and tell yourself something when you're going through all the craziness and growth, what's one thing you would tell yourself?
Uh, uh, well, it's easy to say now that I'm old and retired, but it's you know, this too shall pass. At every point in time, you like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. What am I going to do? And yet 20 years later, it's like, what was I worried about? Why was I getting so worked up about that? So it's this notion that is as difficult and challenging as life can be at the moment. It's a moment. It's not your lifetime. It's a moment, and so focus on the moment, but remember that it's only a moment, and that your life will evolve on, and your career will evolve on, and whatever successes and failures you're dealing with right now are temporary, they're fleeting, and that's both good and bad. I mean, it's good that bad times are fleeting. It's not so good that good times are fleeting as well. But if you're having a good moment, enjoy the moment, because it too will pass, right? And if you're having a bad moment, don't worry about it. It too will pass. So I guess it's just that perspective you get from having lived a while.
Well, I am very grateful for all those moments that you've had, good and bad, because now we can learn from them. And I know you've just wrapped up teaching digital transformation at Catholic University, and I'm sure there'll be lots of other opportunities for you to teach here on the podcast and in other
Sure.
ways, as well. And your 10 grandchildren are very lucky to have you also to learn from.
Well, I enjoy
So
spending time with them too. Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Rich.
Yes. Thank you.
Um,
Yeah, I always enjoy being on the show with you, and you know, uh, sharing my experiences with you and your listeners. And I really think you're doing a great job in terms of trying to bring a lens and a focus to this notion of transformation and scale and growth, and what are the many different ways that you have to worry about that, whether it's the digital side, the people side, the finance side. There are multiple dimensions to transformation, and I think you're onto something here, and I think it's going to continue to grow in membership and impact.
well, thank you so much, Rich. And if you would like to hear more from Rich Napoli, please do subscribe to my podcast here at Wired for Change. Thanks again, and we'll see you.